Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the February Member Appreciation Plus call. This is Amy Lamb. I have the pleasure of serving as your AOTA president, and I thank all of you for joining us this evening. For those of you who haven't joined us in the past, the Member Appreciation Plus calls are purposefully designed to put practical information into the hands of practitioners with the goal that it's something you can use tomorrow in your daily work. And so we've had some great interest in tonight's topic, the distinct value of occupational therapy in schools. And I thank everybody for joining us and look forward to hearing our presenters and also being able to answer your questions later on this evening. Just a couple of housekeeping notes. One thing, if you have not used this platform before, it's automatically designed to be able to send you your continuing education certificate at the end of the webinar. However, you do have to stay on to the very end of the webinar, and then you'll see a pop-up screen that will say the webinar is now over. And at that point, you can go ahead and close out your window, and you'll be able to have that CE certificate sent to you. Also, the webinar is being recorded, so you can listen to it again in the Member Appreciation Plus library later on. And just as a point of reference, the slides that we're going to go over this evening are available for you to be able to download at any point in time during the webinar under the Event Resources tab. So with that said, we're going to go ahead and get started this evening. We have two of our presenters with us, Gloria Frolek Clark and Pam Stephenson. Gloria and Pam are both current occupational therapy practitioners in early intervention in schools. Gloria Frolek Clark serves on the AOTA Board of Directors with me as one of the directors, and Pam is the AOTA Early Intervention and School Special Interest Section chairperson. So we're very fortunate to have them with us this evening. Tonight we're really zeroing in, as I said earlier, on the distinct value of occupational therapy in today's schools. As many of you know, with the recent changes in educational law, occupational therapy practitioners' roles in schools have expanded. And this provides, this means that we no longer have to be focused primarily on individual student progress, but practitioners now play an essential role in supporting school outcomes for all students. And so tonight our presenters are going to use a multi-tiered systems approach to describe the distinct value of occupational therapy and practitioners within district, building, classroom, and student level based on the domain of occupational therapy. Our learning objectives tonight are to explore the expanded role for occupational therapy practitioners working in public school settings, and also to zero in on the distinct value of occupational therapy as we look at the multi-tiered systems approach. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Gloria.
Thank you, Amy. So this is really a challenging and exciting time for occupational therapy practitioners who work in preschools and schools. Click to hear. As you know, the education has really changed since 1975 when the Education for All Handicapped Children Act was passed. The law at the time provided for all children who had disabilities, they were given the right to a free, appropriate public education within the least restrictive public environment, and they were able to have an individualized education program if they were eligible for special education and related services. That's where occupational therapy came in, right? Because we were considered related service. We began practicing in the schools, training teachers about positioning children and feeding and other interventions that were related to the educational needs. The teachers began to realize the knowledge and skills that occupational therapy practitioners brought to the team, and our role started to expand. We became more active with assistive technology, literacy skills via working on handwriting, working on self-regulation activities. So occupational therapy practitioners might support the team in developing the students' functional behavioral assessment and supporting students in work who have needs in the physical, cognitive, sensory, and mental health area. The law has been amended several times, and now it is known as the Individuals with Disabilities Education Improvement Act of 2004, or IDA. Again, just going through a little bit of history, the Rehabilitation Act of 1973, which we usually call 504, right, Section 504, and IDEA allow services to be provided to children who are in general education. So if a child was at risk for education or behavior needs, we could provide screening, evaluation, and services to support their participation in general education through what IDEA called early intervening services, or states had other initiatives called response to intervention. If the state and education agencies allowed, practitioners could provide education to general education teachers that could then be provided to children in the classroom. So this might be universal design for learning, school health, mental health initiatives, and support for curricula, like for handwriting or reading. In states where the laws under licensure actually allow services under screening or wellness-related activities, occupational therapy practitioners were in the general education classroom working with students and teachers. Students who had disabilities but did not require specialized instruction might be eligible for modifications and accommodations and services through 504. Our role in the school under a new law has really changed things. We now have several new opportunities in our roles to support education for all students. It's not about just the students who have disabilities only. We are now working across with all of the students. So we need to be able to move into the roles at the district and school-wide level to support all students. So we're going to talk today about some of the skills that people need to have. So some of these opportunities, just some examples, are to strengthen our partnerships with parents, communities, school personnel in order to address some of these school-wide ideas and policies that will benefit student outcomes. And we can participate in school-wide approaches and even consultation to the school staff. So, for instance, from a mental health perspective, we might be involved with positive behavioral interventions and supports, whether we are assisting the team in providing those or training staff in those. We may be involved in anti-bullying and suicide prevention activities. In physical health, we might be sharing information with teachers about the physical health or social emotional development, presentations for them about fine motor or gross motor skills. Practitioners now might be included in the professional development and training. So we could actually be providing the training to the staff, the teachers, or be there with them on some of the training. And we'll talk more about how that changes it. So ESSA is looking at different bullets, and Okay, so there's 3 different bullets for evidence. ESSA considers their strength of evidence is not the same standards that AOTA uses. So we really want to make sure that you're comfortable with what is their standards, because, you know, your school teams are going to be familiar with the ESSA categories. So we want to make sure that you will as well. On the bottom here, it's kind of small, but there is a document from the Department of Education, the United States Department of Education, that explains all of this for you. But let's just go through them a little bit. Strong evidence, moderate evidence, and promising evidence all must have at least one study with statistically significant and positive effect on students or other relevant outcomes. So what does that mean? So under moderate evidence, there has to be a treatment and a control group, but the students might not be randomized in that type of a setting. There needs to be a large sample, and they consider a large sample as either more than 350 students or 50 groups, like a classroom. with 10 or more children in each group. And multi-site means that it has to be more than one setting or site or population. So we think of like a local education agency or a locality or the state. And as you know, that isn't quite the research that occupational therapy practitioners have been doing in the past year. So we really need to collaborate with others in order to provide that research. A promising evidence is well designed, but doesn't have quite the same level of reliability, integrity as the other one does. So when we're working to identify our interventions in the category, we really need to be talking to researchers in order to start looking at some large multi-site samples and look at that intervention effectiveness. I've been also talking with some of the evidence-based staff at AOTA about some of the systematic reviews that we do and how we might be able to use several of those reviews to look at some of the data that we need to have. In 2015, occupational therapy, AOTA developed a statement to describe the distinct value of occupational therapy. This is what we do. We value health, the quality of life through facilitating participation and engagement. So there are many things that we do as occupational therapists, and we work with people as client-centered and achieving the outcomes. But sometimes in schools, we need to have a statement that might be a little bit easier for people to understand. And if we say we enhance participation, health, well-being, and quality of life through engagement, the occupations as well as the context, right? But I think the next piece is what we do that others on the teams don't. And that is we apply our knowledge and skills, cognition, physical, psychosocial, sensory, and other pieces when we analyze that person, environment, and occupations. And if people understood what we did, that would be really important, wouldn't it, in ongoing conversations with them. Many of you are familiar with the multi-tiered systems of support, but let me just introduce this so as we talk about it, you'll understand the same model that we're coming from. Meanings and titles can change from state to state, but this is based on a public health model, and 3-tier are most common. The one that you see here is just one that we've used in training. On the left is the general education role. On the right is the role of the occupational therapist. Tier 1 is generally about 80 to 90% of the students in school. So in addition to the universal screening that all children get to make sure that they are coming along and not at risk, and the core instruction that they get using a scientific-based curriculum, there are also school-wide programs that many schools are putting into place, like response to intervention, the positive behavioral intervention and supports, school mental health. And occupational therapists can be really helpful with that. Sometimes children who are on tier 1 and at risk move to tier 2, where they get some targeted interventions, and occupational therapists can help the teams decide on what those could be and help them to collect data in order to make decisions. Do we move the child back to tier 1? Do we move them to tier 3? Do we keep them here? What do we need to do? And at the top tier, in some states, that is where the child gets intensive services and considered for eligibility for special education. Occupational therapists generally are busy at all of these levels, depending on your school and what you're allowed to do. So now Pam is going to talk next about the occupational therapy practice framework.
Thanks, Gloria. I hope this will be a quick refresher for all of us. I actually love the framework a lot. I think it really helps guide our practice really well in schools and in other settings. The framework guides our practice across a variety of populations, settings, and contexts, and it really gives us a common language to describe our distinct value and role in promoting health, wellness, and participation in life activities. And in addition, it really does highlight our core belief about the relationship between health and engaging in meaningful occupations. The framework isn't prescriptive, and it really should be used to guide our practice in conjunction with specific practice contexts. So in school-based practice, we need to combine the framework with education approaches, evidence-informed practices, and legislation. Before we think about the domain of occupational therapy in relation to school-based practice, let's take a moment to consider who our client is in the context of schools. The framework describes three broad categories of client: persons or individuals, groups, and populations. Traditionally, we have worked at the individual client level in schools, serving individual students in the context of mandated services such as under IDEA or 504 plans, as Gloria mentioned. And we've used primarily a caseload model. We've also provided services to individual teachers and paraprofessional staff. More recently, we've expanded our practice and moved towards serving clients at the group level, and examples of this might include small groups or whole class interventions, as well as staff training sessions. And this has occurred in both special education and general education contexts. Being able to provide services at the organisational or systems level is an important part of the continuum of occupational therapy practice, and it really does allow us to have a greater impact across multiple people and contexts. And there are many, many good examples of occupational therapy practitioners serving whole populations, ranging from whole school initiatives such as serving on anti-bullying committees through to whole district initiatives such as curriculum review committees, and Gloria will talk about these again shortly. Another perspective is to consider the client from a leadership lens. There is growing interest in OT practitioners transitioning to school leadership roles, and this can happen in a variety of ways. Serving on or leading a school-wide committee is one way, while another way is to take steps towards holding school administrative positions. AOTA is committed to supporting practitioners who want to move to school leadership, and in 2017 they wrote to the State Superintendents of Education and State Directors of Special Education to advocate for this. There have also been a couple of articles in OT practice on this topic in the past couple of years, and you can locate these resources bundled together on the AOT website, and we have put some links at the end of the presentation also. In addition to this, we're seeing increased grassroots initiatives. Working together can open up a variety of career pathways for school-based practitioners that extend beyond one-to-one service delivery. While the requirements vary from state to state, it is important to document examples of your current leadership activities, especially in relation to the school district or the school as your client, and really to emphasize how you took a leadership role in those initiatives. So let's look at our domain. We can think of our domain as really being the broad arena of our scope of practice. It emphasizes our unique expertise and knowledge across 5 aspects. And I know you know these, but I'll just read them for a refresher. Those are occupations, client factors, performance skills, performance patterns, and contexts and environments. The relationship between all of these aspects of our domain is dynamic and transactional. In school-based practice, we're looking at it from an educational lens and often with a top-down approach. We want to start with the occupations that the student needs to or wants to engage in as part of the educational program, and then to consider the supports and barriers to the student's occupational performance. Occupations occur in context, and one of the fantastic things about school-based practice is that we have so many opportunities to provide both evaluation and intervention in a variety of naturally occurring contexts and environments. Our professional reasoning leads us to reflect on the ways in which all of the aspects of our domain intersect to impact the student's participation in the educational program and environment. We can also look at this from a systems lens. For example, in what ways do the routines of the classroom or school impact both the students and the staff? I want to mention evaluation briefly. The OT process articulates our distinct value from evaluation through to skilled intervention and outcome measurement. We use a strengths-based and client-centered perspective in combination with authentic evaluation processes to understand the individual's occupational performance and participation. In school-based practice, authentic evaluation is an individualized and contextual process where the practitioner identifies and uses a combination of evaluation strategies to best capture the student's occupational performance and participation. and this will look different for each student. Evaluation occurs in many different ways and at different points across the student's school journey. Some examples might include, if we look under IDEA, we may be evaluating participation in the education environment, including the adaptive skills required for that participation. We might evaluate to determine accommodations or services that are required as part of a 504 plan. Depending on individual state regulations, practitioners might also conduct screenings on students or in classrooms, and it's very important to know what your state regulations are because not all states permit screening of individual students. Another example of evaluation might be to review data as part of progress monitoring of performance against targets or goals. In all of the examples, though, practitioners are gathering data to assist teams to make data-based decisions. As part of the school team, OT practitioners are concerned with outcomes. We want to provide effective interventions that facilitate individual students being successful and achieving improved educational outcomes. While we often focus this at the individual student level, we can also view it from a systems perspective. We can be involved in school-wide outcomes related to a variety of measures, including increased literacy, decreased dropout rates, social emotional learning, and positive mental health. School-based practice has evolved a lot since it started, and we now have many more opportunities to use our full scope of practice in different ways. One of the challenges of multi-tiered systems of support is that it can be very hard to find time or capacity to work at the systems level because of high caseloads and limited staffing. While it takes time to overcome institutional barriers to changing practice, there are also opportunities to self-reflect and to ask questions such as, what would the impact be if I did this one thing? For example, what would be the impact if I changed to a workload approach? Or, what would it look like if I became involved in the school mental health initiative? What would it look like if I was in a leadership role here? We can also ask ourselves, what can I try? For example, can I try advocating for collaborative consultation services rather than direct hands-on services at the next few IEP meetings? These are just some examples. In 2014, AOTA, APTA, and ASHA produced a joint statement on using a workload approach in school-based practice, as this better reflects the breadth of activities that practitioners engage in. This approach may not suit everyone. However, it is one strategy that could potentially support involvement at all levels in an MTSS context over time. Another idea is to consider it from an appreciative inquiry perspective and to ask, what is going well? What are the strengths? What are the things that we are known for doing really well? Then ask, what is okay? What are the things that maybe aren't exactly how we want to be, but they're working for the most part? And then finally to ask, what needs to change most? What is it that is not working as well as it needs to be? Is it that I'm not using my full scope of practice? Is it that I only receive referrals for a couple of specific things? Is my caseload overflowing and I have no time for anything else? It's really important to identify and keep the strengths and to celebrate those, while also looking for other areas to enhance. I'm now going to hand you back to Gloria, who's going to talk about the continuum of services.
Thank you, Pam. So this part, what we want to do is talk with you about how OT fits into many different areas. For example, we picked these 4, working at the district-wide level, the school-wide level, the general education classroom, and individuals who are an IEP. Part of the reason we did this is we hear from people who are saying they are so busy, but they're working at the individual level. And if you look at this, or if you remember that triangle that we talked about, you're at a tiny piece where you can affect change, sometimes by working with the system and change all of the children or decrease your referrals, than just working individually with 1 or 2 or whatever the children are directly, but thinking about working at the systems level. So let's talk about that. When you're working at a district-wide level, people need to understand who you are and what you do, right? So we just listed some people here that are across the district, parent-teacher organizations that are, working at different levels, your bus drivers, etc. But do these people know who you are? Do they know what your scope of practice is? And, are you available to talk with them? And, a lot of us always laughed about working in the schools because the custodian or the secretary were sometimes our best friends. They knew where everything was. But there are a lot of different people on that list, and I'm sure in your school there's even more that you might deal with day to day. And do they understand what you bring? Can they advocate for you? And we thought it would be also interesting to talk a little bit today about you need to articulate your distinct value and supports that you offer, but what is out there for funding? Because that's really the crux of everything sometimes, isn't it? We know that practitioners could be hired directly by the school district or the intermediate agencies. Some are contracted from agencies or local hospitals. So we have many different people coming into the schools to work. We know that some agencies basically want to hire practitioners based on the number of IEP hours. But if we believe in and we communicate to them our value, then we have to think about not just the direct IEP hours, but also the indirect services that we provide. For instance, we are training and educating school personnel. We're assisting with the environmental modifications. We're co-instructing in classrooms. We could be working on low-tech and high technology, so many different things. So how do we get them to understand what we do in order to make a change? We really need to capture the value of occupational therapy and how it adds to schools. So I talked to some administrators that I know are doing this, and what they said is they are using a daily fee cost. And that way they can identify the workload components for the occupational therapy practitioners, and it's not just around an IEP, it's around the other things that we do during the day that are valued. So it's that working within the context of the school and how we can offer that information to the staff. So just some action ideas at this district level, and some of these will be similar for building level, obviously, but let's just talk about these. For instance, school district might have a committee, and it's handwriting, right? And we need to get on there because the district might not have a real scientific-based one, or they're not teaching it, or there's some issues with it. But the employer says, no, we don't want to fund an OT's time to go on there. So you might figure out, I can communicate with them that if I sit on this, it might show how the number of referrals coming to me are going to decrease because now we have a solid program. And the sad part is we don't have the research to support this, but those of you who've used that all know that it makes a difference. I have done different in-services in my district-wide or building-wide, and my referrals in that area start dropping, which is good, right? Because if they can handle it, they didn't need me. Now the referrals that come to me are, 4 or 5 kids that have much more difficult needs that they could not address instead of, the 20 or 30 kids that they wanted you to look at for something else. If you volunteer, be sure you know how much time you're getting into. Sometimes it's just a presentation. I've had others that want me to attend 2 or 3 times meeting a year. If you're going to get on a curriculum committee, find out when that curriculum is being reviewed, because some are reviewed every year, some are reviewed on a rotating basis every 3 to 4 years. We could be working on analyzing some of the data if that's something that you're interested in, or district-wide training. If we start advocating for the increased education ability for all students, starting with young children, think about that. We know that research tells us people with lower education and income have higher rates of depression and are more likely to become alcoholics, opioid users, and consider suicide. There is a connection between health conditions and education. So we need to advocate that all children have access to quality services. Remember I said earlier, we're now in that range where we are no longer working with children only on IEPs. We really are advocating for all children. Some school districts are collaborating with mobile vision clinics to perform eye examinations and obtain glasses. Others are focusing on effective medications for children for asthma, and they've noticed a 25% reduction in the symptoms in their days absent from school. Chronic absenteeism affects academic success and is a predictor for graduation. So if we work together and we're blending healthcare and education, and we are addressing these issues like homelessness, lack of transportation, childcare, school attendance, we are going to make the difference across all of the children. So the Alabama Department of Health found a 10% increase in vaccinations correlated with the reduction of absenteeism of 45,000 students. Just something as simple as bringing the vaccinations into the school to be delivered made a huge difference in children showing up to learn. So as specialized instruction support personnel, which is our title under ESSA, we can be working with these school districts to start identifying what are their needs and find collaborative ways to increase student outcomes, which is a much different role for many people, but it really is an important role and one that as occupational therapists, if you think about our background and our skill level, the systems change are things that we have been doing for a long time, just in different settings. So now let's talk about building-wide. So I listed some people on here that are a little bit different, but you might be sitting on a 504 team, or you may not even know if your building has one, and you might want to seek that out. The nurses are our best friends, I think. I had the nurses doing many different programs with me, and they really understood what OT brought to the table and were great advocates for our services as well. Sometimes we really need to be thoughtful about where could we best be involved, because none of us have extra hours just laying around, right? Like I'm just sitting here, don't know what to do with my time. But it's more of a value, like where should we put our time in order to make the most impact for people? Is it doing a workshop and training everybody in social emotional skills or social participation and really getting that going on self-regulation? And that can trickle down to many other children and decreases our referrals, but also starts educating other people about things that they could be doing in the building. Does your building have an assistance team that provides suggestions to teachers for children who are at risk? Sometimes that's a great place for us either to volunteer to share some evidence-based strategy for them or to put together packets of information that they could use. If you find yourself having referrals in the same age group or the same type of problem, it might be that they're really asking for some training that could be done. Again, thinking about this from a building-wide perspective, are there committees that you might serve on that would train teachers on mental health needs of children? We've talked about this many times with other people, and what we always come back with is OTs look at things differently. We see things that just are disconnected or that somehow just don't make sense. For instance, I had a child referred to me for handwriting. I always said that was like the gateway in. And then as I watched this child, I said to the parent, I'm really concerned because your child just does not seem happy. He just seems like he's dragging himself around from day to day. And the mother said to me, he's been talking about killing himself and I don't know what to do. This is a 4th grader. And I said, you hang up the phone with me and you call your doctor immediately. If he's talking about it, as you know, as OTs, there usually is something going on. So that's what we bring to the table. Because of this multiple lens that we can look at people with, we see things that we just don't always, other people don't see. So let's talk about some activities at this level that we might be looking at. One would be we talked a little bit about doing some of the TBIS, the mental health, teaching the teachers how to lift and transfer students as well, anti-bullying. So there are a lot of different things. As Pam was talking about, our clients could be the teachers. It could be the parents. There are many different people that we would be working with. All right, so Pam's going to talk with you next about classroom level.
Thanks, Gloria. Offering services at the classroom level is happening across the country, and there are many great examples of this. These include working with teachers to develop whole class screenings and strategies for students at Tier 1 of the model. Some examples that practitioners have shared include organising self-regulation activities, including yoga and movement breaks, as well as embedding diverse fine motor activities throughout the day. So in this approach, OTA practitioners might co-teach with classroom teachers, or they may use a coaching model, but the idea is that all students in the classroom can benefit from the OT expertise, but not all students are on the OT's caseload. It can be hard to know where to start. So some ideas might be to talk with the school's early intervening services coordinator, sometimes called the RTI coordinator, to identify a specific project or classroom. Or you could work with a teacher with whom you already have a great relationship. I think it's always better to start when you have a good relationship to build off from. Another idea is to post on Community and see if you can find a mentor who's already gone through this and could offer practical strategies. Thinking about the individual level, I think this is the area that many practitioners have most experience in. That's when I think most of us start at this level. We go to a school-based job, we inherit a caseload, and we get really right in there serving the individual child. And that's a really important thing for us to keep on doing as well. We are really good at supporting individual students in context in the classroom or other parts of the school environment, such as the cafeteria or during recess or on field trips, for example. This also includes working collaboratively with the educational team to set up and review data collection systems as part of progress monitoring. So at this level, we're still working with a wide range of people, but our efforts are primarily focused on individual students. Some ideas for action might be that if you've been primarily using a pull-out model, you could perhaps then explore ways to support individual students in the context in the classroom or other parts of the school environment. Another idea is to review your explanation of school-based OT. Does it fully reflect the full scope of practice and opportunity and expertise that we can bring to the school environment? AOTA has some very useful resources that can help us to expand our practice from working with an individual child at one tier towards offering supports at other tiers. You'll find some really good handouts on the AOTA website specifically targeted at recess and the cafeteria, and we've included links to those at the end of the presentation. In summary, really we know that educational and professional shifts have opened up more opportunities and roles for school-based practitioners. Equally, we know that it means we can't keep on taking on new things without something else changing. So our capacity has remained the same whilst new opportunities have arisen. Multi-tiered systems of support offers us opportunities to provide different types of services to a broader range of clients and to really serve broader populations. Equally, operating at all tiers of the MTSS model can provide us with valuable experiences that support us in transitioning to leadership roles. Gloria is going to talk about some other ideas for moving ahead.
Thank you. So we want to share with you some guidance. As you're thinking ahead, what can you do? One idea is to find a mentor. You could join AOTA Communities in Practice. You could start a school group at your state OT association. talk with some colleagues at your agency, finding different resources to help you on your journey. AOTA has continuing education conferences and books. Maybe you would want to advocate for an increased role within the MTSS framework within your school or building or district. There are different pathways to school leadership, sometimes starting small. For instance, at our agency, we wanted to create leadership roles for many people, and there are people who are interested in feeding, and we had a little feeding training group, and they were responsible for doing that. We had other people who were responsible for other areas, assistive technology or whatever, and just let people build some of that. Then we had people who were the leads, and we had other people who were really interested in going on to school and to become consultants or principals or other areas like that. But just think about what might be interesting to you and how you could build that leadership, because we are all leaders. We're all hopefully empowered to be leaders, but it's what really fits for us. Also do a skills audit. Think about what are your current skills, what might be some areas for growth, what do you do well, what do you need some help with.
Gloria, I just realized I missed a slide. That's my fault. So I apologize to all of you who are tuning in. But building what Gloria just said about that was we really wanted to make sure that we're all identifying our strengths and the things that we're good at and communicating those to other people. And so part of that can be acknowledging our strengths and then also setting those goals and outcomes for ourselves and identifying a doable first step in that process to leadership or different practice.
Right. Thank you. So I'm going to jump back to 36. And yes, it's talking about the strengths. The other thing is it's important, I think, to identify what are your barriers and your challenges. And sometimes can you meet these at a systems level? For instance, we had some OTs who are really trying to advocate for different handwriting. I'm just taking that as an example, but that's what they were working on, a curriculum. And they were meeting and talking about how they could do this in their district. I happened to be working at the higher level in our agency, and I ran into the curriculum director who talks to all of the curriculum directors of the schools. I got on her agenda, presented different curriculum to the district or to the school curriculum people, and when the OTs went to their curriculum director, he had already heard about all of this, and he said, exactly, tell me how much it'll cost, and he went for it. So sometimes we can get to the same place by going around different paths and avenues. How can you get there? How can you make this happen? If one doesn't work, is there another way to get this to work? And then, we're working in school, so we always think about goals or outcomes for ourselves. Is there something that you could set, maybe a first step that you would like to do in a couple of months or in an annual, with the school year? But think about that. So I'm going to jump now to 38, and this talks about different resources. Pam had gone over some of these with you already, and if you click on here, it'll actually take you to those resources on the Promoting School Leadership, which is something that we have really worked hard at AOTA and at multiple levels. The workload document that was done with ASHA and APTA and AOTA is also on here. Slide 39, there is a recess promotion leave and cafeteria leave. Sometimes people say, I don't know how to do what you're asking. And so there are many resources that AOTA has put together, the volunteer groups, to make this work. There's, if you're not familiar with the very last one, that is the evidence-based practice and research. If you click on there, there is a lot of research that is being done. In fact, we are putting together more. We just finished a review of literature that covers early childhood, that covers school age, for literacy, for ADLs, for positive behaviors. There's a lot of information that will be coming soon. And then just some other resources that are out there. If you go to that website, there are podcasts, there are official documents. For instance, the document on the far right, the Guidelines for Occupational Therapy Services and Early Intervention in Schools, was written in the last couple of years, and It is an official document of our profession. On the left is the distinct value. There is a flyer. It's a couple-page flyer for administrators. There is also one for families. And just a heads up, the best practice for occupational therapy in schools book will be, it's at the printer now, I believe, so it should be ready by conference if that is something you are interested in. So just as kind of a summary here, we want to make sure that you understand our distinct values. We really are promoting participation and engagement in occupations, right? That's what we do. That's why we are in the classrooms, we are in the bathrooms, we are at recess, we're in the gymnasiums, we're in the cafeterias. We are where the children are because that's what it's all about. We're there for the person, we're there for the environment, and we're there for the activities that they are doing. So we're hoping that this webinar has allowed you to feel empowered to be leaders in this area. Again, one step at a time, right? But really helping us to move our profession forward and really showing people what it is that we can do as occupational therapists. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria and Pam. Wow, you guys covered a lot of ground in those 45 minutes, and we had some really wonderful questions coming in. So, Pam, I think we're going to start with you. Do you want to start with one of the questions that you have on your list?
Yes, there was a question about caseload in relation to scope as practice. Let me see if I can find it here. And the question really was, how can we manage with high caseloads, basically? And so we don't have dosing guidelines through AOTA. There was a podcast last year which talked about service delivery and scope as practice, because while caseload guidelines do exist in some states, I think Ohio has them, a few others have them, it's a very simplistic way of looking at caseloads and dosing for services. It doesn't take into account necessarily the complexity of the caseload and the whole workload. So at the minute, we don't have national caseload guidelines for OT practice in schools.
Great. Thanks, Pam. And Gloria, I'm going to come to you next for a question, but while you find one to answer, I just want to remind everyone that if you want to download those slides, that you can find them under the Event Resources pull-down menu, and it may be kind of on the edge of your screen. Somebody's was kind of off the edge of the screen, and it's under the Q&A box, so you can go ahead and download those slides so that you can take a look at them later. Gloria, I'll toss it back to you.
Sure. I'm going to answer the one about ESSA and evidence. It says, going back to the evidence categories, they wanted me to define the strong evidence category. I will, but I would really also suggest that you get that, that handout, because it really has a lot of detail, obviously, that I can't go over here in just a few minutes. But strong evidence is generally a study that has been done, again, in that multi-setting and all of that, but it is randomized. And where we talked about the moderate, then we're not necessarily randomized, but you have to have a control group, and then you have your intervention. But strong would be randomized, and nobody has any idea. And you also have to think about the risk of bias. You might have randomized the children, but if you give one teacher, the teacher knows that she is doing the intervention, then it has a high risk of bias, because that could change it. So, yeah, strong evidence for that first one. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. I'll come back to you, and I know you have several on your list too.
Okay. There is a question here which says that as we move from a caseload model to a workload approach, are we moving away from IEP goals and specific service frequency duration to accommodate for the time we are utilizing working with the whole classroom or in various committees? And I think that's a great question. And really there's no easy answer to that one. Not everyone's moving to a workload approach. AOTA, APTA, and ASHA have advocated for this. And really, within that, we're looking at other ways to deliver services that are not only one-to-one services for children, but are using collaborative consultation as well. So it's not necessarily an either or, it's really a continuum of service delivery, and trying to get the best fit for each school district and each OT practitioner.
Thanks, Pam. Gloria, do you want to take another one?
Sure. There are a couple actually that are kind of similar. One person has asked, how do you reconcile the fact that occupational therapy is now open to all students with confidentiality? The person's special ed director refuses to have them look at a student that is not on their workload. And so the question is, how does that depend on her states? And another person asked, do you have to have an official diagnosis for OT services? So they're kind of similar. Let me answer. First of all, the law that you need to follow above every other law is your licensure law in your state, because that is not a law. Even if your principal or your school tells you to do something, if it's against your licensure law, you don't want to do it because you could lose your license, right? So make sure that you're familiar with your license, because some licensure laws do not allow you to practice in more of a general setting. You can only see a person who, A, you might have to have a prescription from a doctor, or B, that you might not be able to serve somebody that you have not evaluated first, because that is what's happening in the multi-tiered system. Under IDA, you don't evaluate them for special education, and that's the only evaluation. Under MTSS, it talks about EIS, the early intervening services, they talk about screening for the purpose of helping in general education. So that is where some states are they're looking at this as health and wellness. I went to my state and talked with them, and they called it screening, and they said that you would screen until you have determined either they don't need OT or they do need OT, in which case the law also says if you feel they do need OT, you move to an evaluation, right? So your licensure really makes that definition of, are you seeing the children directly, working with children, or are you working more with the teachers to give them ideas? The second part then is, what do we do? Does the district that you're working in even allow you to do these things? So if I'm working with a child in general education, they would not have an official diagnosis, but I am working there with them in a short-term intervention, or I might be giving the teacher ideas of what they could do with that child. Let's take a child who has a lot of behavior issues, and the team is trying to figure out what to do. The child is not yet on an IEP, but they're just wondering, what can we do? Is it a child who had childhood trauma? They're not sure what they can do with them. Sometimes the OT coming in can give the team a different frame of reference that they can be looking at and doing it that way. If your special ed director does not understand what your role is under ESSA, you might want to ask, is this something that I can do? I had a principal that said, my teachers really want to come to you for more information because they value what you say to them. And so once a week, I would sit for a half of an hour in the library before school started, and they could come to me with their questions. That way it was not child specific, in that I didn't know the child's name, but they might say the child has difficulty with this, this, or this, and general ideas, right? Try this kind of paper, or try this, or it might be a child that we needed to take in a step further and take them to the building assistance team level. But I just want you to think about multiple ways that you could do this, but it's different, right, than how we used to do things. Children in general education don't usually have a diagnosis, and so it's a little bit different way of working. Thank you.
Thanks, Pam. I'm going to toss it back to you because I know you have a big list. I've been sending questions off to you and Gloria.
Okay. There are a couple of questions here asking about the future role of OT assistants in school-based practice. A couple of questions here. Will there be more demand? What is the future for OTAs? And that's a question. And, we have to keep on recognizing and celebrating the role that OTAs play in school-based practice, and really looking at OTA-OTR partnership and the value that brings to school districts. There's a lot of variation across the country, so it's really hard to say to give a sort of a broad answer, but I think we have a responsibility to highlight the distinct value that OTAs bring to school-based practice in terms of what they offer as part of whether it's MTSS, serving kids at IEPs, and the partnership with OTRs.
Great, thank you. Gloria, how about you?
Do you want me to take the next question?
Yes,
sure.
Go right ahead.
Somebody asked about the occupational therapy practice framework and asked if it included executive functioning as something that we address. I would really refer people back to that. I use it all of the time in my practice. So if you look at performance skills, for instance, it talks about attending and choosing and handling and inquiring and initiating. And then, of course, there are the client factors, which would have all of those types of pieces, all of the cognitive information in there as well. So yes, OT is very well grounded in being able to use all of those types of activities. In fact, some of the interventions when we went through the systematic review, the highest evidence was in the cognitive interventions, CogFun, co-op, some of those for kids. And OTs aren't really addressing those in many areas. So we really need to get back into doing that. Thank you.
Yeah. A great point. Thanks, Gloria. Pam, I'm going to go back to you because we only have about 4 minutes left, so hopefully we can each get another question or two in.
Yeah, there's a good number of questions about the workload approach. Can you direct me to additional readings regarding workload and districts who are doing it? There's a really great website set up by two colleagues of ours, Mindy Garfinkel and Francine Soroya. They have developed a workload called website Garfinkel Soroya, and it's actually on the AOTA website, the link for it. They have looked at the workload approach. They've combined resources, and so we can certainly put that link out there too with this presentation, I think, but it's on the AOTA website. They've got personal experience of moving from caseload to workload, and have combined a number of resources there for that.
Great, thank you. Yes, there's quite a bit of comments coming in on that, so I think that our members will find that to be very helpful, so thank you.
Yeah.
Gloria, I'll hop back to you.
I do. I have one that is a question that I've always wondered myself, so this is good that it's here. The person said they really wanted to be involved with the social emotional school-wide initiatives like self-regulation, but they don't have time. And the district now has hired social workers, and they are getting involved, and they really excel at doing all of this. And they're wondering, how can we reach administrators on a larger level instead of trying to change mindset? You know, I know OTs who have brought zones of regulation and some of the other programs that are out there for self-regulation into the school, and then they turned it over to other professions and have walked away. And that's always puzzled me. Why would you do that? And I see people all the time using materials that were developed by OTs, and the OTs are not even there to consult or to help them develop that program. So it is a big area, and it's something that myself, when I see that, I always go over to the person and say, isn't this stuff great? I'm an occupational therapist. Is there a way I can help you? Or I try to get on those committees. And I know when you say that you don't have time, I totally get that. But sometimes, again, it comes back to what are our priorities in order to hit the number of kids. And so sometimes it helps with cutting back on those referrals. I also think that it makes us more valuable, and for the administrators to realize, wow, an OT can do all of these things. Maybe I need to have more OTs in here and to be able to do this, because we do go across many things. But if we are caught up only in doing one child at a time through an IEP, we don't really see all of those other pieces. The other thing is, when you're pulling a child out of the classroom, you're missing the opportunity to train the teachers and to educate them on what you do. So I think it's really important that we keep in mind that value that we have in the indirect as well as the direct. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Pam, do you have one last question that you'd like to be able to answer this evening?
There's a couple on the theme of I get this model, how do I go from caseload to workload? How can I add in extra things to my day? And I think what I would say is we have resources to support that, but it's thinking about change in a small way. So it's not going from one model to another overnight. It's making small incremental changes over time and gradually shifting practice over time.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that that's such a great, important point that in any setting, practice doesn't shift generally overnight, that it does shift over time, and how we as practitioners can lead some of that change oftentimes also happens over time. And I think some of the other questions that I saw coming in really referred to us also needing to take a multifaceted approach. Like, for example, there's certain things that AOTA can do in terms of getting information out to administration leaders and those sorts of things, and then they also need to see and hear similar messages coming from the occupational therapy practitioners that are in their buildings, because it's that consistency of the messaging that helps to really be able to drive some of that change moving forward. So I just want to, as we close tonight, say thank you again to both Gloria and Pam for giving us their time this evening. I also want to say thank you to all of the members who came on this evening. I think this is our highest attended Member Appreciation Plus webinar that we've had with the live webinar to date. And I just want to say thank you, and it sends a strong message to all of us about the importance of making sure that we share these messages and that we provide these kinds of supports for members to be able to take these practical approaches into your work. So thank you again, everybody, for giving us your time this evening, and have a good evening.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.